April 11th, 1945. The ancient Ettersberg hill rises above the Thuringian forest, blanketed in the soft, pale green of a German spring. Below, the city of Weimar, the historic home of Goethe and Schiller, continues its daily rhythm, barely 5 miles away. But up here, the wind carries a different reality. Elements of the U.S. 6th Armored Division grind their tracks to a halt. The roar of the engines dies down, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence and a smell. It is a thick, cloying stench of burning flesh and unburied decay that cuts through the fresh air, choking the men in the lead vehicles. They grip their weapons, expecting a final, desperate ambush from the SS. Instead, through the thinning mist and the high electrified fences, they see the impossible. Thousands of walking skeletons in striped rags, shuffling toward the wire, eyes hollowed out by darkness that defies military logic. This is not a battlefield. This is Buchenwald, and the horror waiting inside the gates is about to shatter the soul of the American command. By the second week of April 1945, the Third Reich is not merely losing, it is dissolving. The organized, terrifying machine that had blitzed across Europe in 1940 has been reduced to a patchwork of shattered divisions, terrified Volkssturm militia, and fanatic SS units fighting for a future that has already evaporated. On the Western Front, the momentum is entirely with the Allies. General George S. Patton's Third Army is tearing through the German heartland with a ferocity that matches the general's own volatile temperament. They are moving so fast that their supply lines are stretched to the breaking point, often outrunning their own maps. The strategy is no longer about winning battles. It is about occupation and speed. The objective is to seize territory, crush the remaining pockets of resistance, and meet the Soviet Red Army, which is steamrolling toward Berlin from the east. For the average American GI in the 4th or 6th Armored Divisions, the war has become a surreal blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. These men have been fighting since Normandy, or the Bulge. They are hardened, cynical, and universally weary. They have seen death in every conceivable form: artillery barrages, sniper fire, tank battles. They have liberated towns where civilians cheered and threw flowers, and they have taken towns where sniper fire cracked from church steeples. They believe they have seen the worst that war can offer. To them, the enemy is the soldier in the field grey uniform, or the camouflaged tank hunter hiding in the ruins. They understand combat. They understand killing. They are utterly unprepared for what happens when the logic of combat ends and the logic of extermination begins. The intelligence reports filtering down to the unit commanders are spotty. There are rumors of labor camps and prison centers, but the reality is obscured by the fog of war and the incredulity of the rational mind. Even as they push deeper into Thuringia, the landscape seems deceptively normal. The spring of 1945 is unseasonably beautiful. The forests are lush. The towns, though damaged, still stand with their timber-framed houses. It looks like the Germany of picture postcards, hiding the rot beneath. The logistical situation is chaotic. The autobahns and country roads are clogged, not just with retreating German columns, but with a human tide of misery. Displaced persons, liberated slave laborers from the east, and German refugees fleeing the Russians create a traffic nightmare for the advancing tanks. The American advance is a juggernaut of steel trying to navigate a humanitarian catastrophe. Commanders like Patton are focused on tactical fluidity. They want to bypass strong points, encircle cities, and keep moving. Weimar is just another dot on the map, another cultural hub to be secured. Intelligence indicates that the Gauleiter of Thuringia, Fritz Sokol, has turned the region into a defensive bastion. But the resistance is brittle. The Wehrmacht is surrendering in droves, often thousands of men giving up to a single jeep patrol. But the SS is different. As the Americans approach the sector around Weimar, the resistance stiffens briefly, then mysteriously evaporates. The SS guards at the facilities on the outskirts of the city are not preparing to fight to the death. They are preparing to flee. They are frantically burning documents, dismantling execution devices, and forcing thousands of prisoners on death marches away from the front lines. They know what is coming. They know that the Americans are bringing judgment with them. On April 11th, the 6th Armored Division under Major General Robert W. Groh pushes through the wooded hills northwest of Weimar. They are looking for enemy armor. Instead, they find the railway sidings. They find the static, silent trains, packed not with supplies, but with the dead. The scouts radio back reports that do not make sense. They describe stacks of cordwood that turn out to be human bodies. They describe a smell that overpowers the diesel fumes of their tanks. The war for territory is effectively over. The confrontation with the Holocaust is just beginning. The Americans are not entering a military target. They are stumbling into a crime scene of continental proportions. And unlike the bombed-out cities which can be explained by the brutal necessity of war, what lies ahead on the Ettersberg hill defies all explanation. To understand the fury that is about to consume the Allied command, one must understand the geography of the horror. Buchenwald is not hidden in a desolate wasteland on the Polish frontier. It sits on the northern slopes of the Ettersberg, a hill visible from the streets of Weimar. Weimar is not an ordinary German city. It is the spiritual capital of German humanism. It is the city of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Friedrich Schiller, the giants of German literature. It is the birthplace of the Bauhaus movement and the site where the first German democratic constitution was signed in 1919. For 2 centuries, this city represented the pinnacle of European enlightenment, a place where the human mind was celebrated for its capacity to create beauty. And yet, in 1937, the SS chose this specific location to build a monument to human destruction. The placement was intentional. The Ettersberg had been a picnic spot, a place where Goethe himself would hike to find inspiration. The Nazis cleared the forest and erected a facility designed to crush the enemies of the state, political dissidents, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Soviet POWs. They even preserved a tree within the camp walls, Goethe's oak, creating a grotesque tableau where the symbol of German culture stood in the center of a starvation yard. For 8 years, the city and the camp existed in a symbiotic embrace. Buchenwald was not a secret. It was an industry. The SS officers lived in comfortable villas in the suburbs. Their wives shopped in Weimar's markets. The camp's administrative buildings were connected to the city's power grid and water supply. Local businessmen secured contracts to supply the camp with building materials and food. In return, the camp supplied slave labor to the nearby Gustloff-Werke armaments factory. The citizens of Weimar watched the trucks rumble through their cobblestone streets. They saw the faces of the men in the back. They smelled the smoke that drifted down from the crematorium chimney when the wind blew from the northwest. They noticed the grey ash that sometimes settled on their window ledges like strange, greasy snow. But in the Third Reich, survival depended on a meticulously cultivated ignorance. The people of Weimar learned to look without seeing. They learned to smell the burning dead and tell themselves it was just the factory refuse. They constructed a psychological wall far stronger than the barbed wire on the hill, convincing themselves that whatever was happening up there was none of their business, and certainly not their fault. By April 1945, that wall of denial is the only defense they have left. As the American tanks roll into the city squares, the citizens hang white sheets from their windows. They smile at the conquerors. They claim they are ordinary people, good Germans who hated the Nazis. They insist they knew nothing of the camp on the hill. They are unaware that the man commanding the Third Army, General George S. Patton, has no patience for denial. The Americans are about to force a collision between the high culture of the valley and the atrocities of the summit. The distance between Weimar and Buchenwald is 5 miles of paved road, but the psychological distance is absolute. That gap is about to be closed by force. The first Americans to breach the perimeter are not the generals, but the scouts and forward elements of the 4th Armored Division. These are young men, mostly in their early 20s, coated in dust and grease. They roll their jeeps through the main gate, past the wrought iron inscription that reads "Jedem das sein," to each his own. They kill the engines. The silence that follows is heavier than any artillery barrage. Buchenwald is a city unto itself, a sprawling complex of wooden barracks and administrative blocks. But as the soldiers dismount, the structure of the camp reveals itself as a machine designed for efficient degradation. They move cautiously toward the roll call square, the Appellplatz. Here, the prisoners emerge. They do not look like men. They are husks, shaved heads, striped uniforms, hanging off skeletal frames, legs the thickness of broom handles. They shuffle forward, some weeping, some touching the soldiers' uniforms as if to verify they are real. A hardened sergeant, a man who has fought from the beaches of Normandy, reaches into his pack to offer a ration bar. His hand shakes. He drops it. He bursts into tears. Deeper inside they find the little camp, the quarantine zone. This is the bottom circle of this inferno. There are no bunks here, just wooden shelves stacked 4 high. The stench is a physical wall, a mixture of dysentery, unwashed bodies, and gangrene. The soldiers find men lying in their own filth, too weak to move, their eyes following the Americans with a terrifying blank intensity. In the courtyard, the soldiers stumble upon the evidence of the final days. The crematorium ovens were too slow for the rate of death in the last weeks, so the bodies were simply stacked. Like cordwood, a pile of naked, emaciated corpses 5 feet high and 20 feet long. The skin is yellow and parchment thin. Limbs are tangled in unnatural angles. The reaction among the troops is universal. The bravado of the armored division evaporates. Men who have joked about death for months fall silent. Some vomit where they stand. Others go into a cold, murderous rage, gripping their rifles, looking for anyone in a German uniform. They have discovered that the enemy they were fighting wasn't just conquering territory. They were protecting this. The liberation is not a celebration. It is a trauma. The soldiers radio their commanders, their voices cracking over the static. They do not have the medical supplies for this. They do not have the food. They do not have the words to describe what they are looking at. The chain of command is alerted. The generals are coming. General George S. Patton is a man constructed of contradictions. He is a romantic warrior who writes poetry and believes in reincarnation. Yet he is a ruthless pragmatist who drives his men to the breaking point. He loves the pageantry of war, the polished helmets, the riding crops, the clash of armor. To Patton, war is the ultimate test of human will, a bloody but honorable contest between nations. He has spent his life preparing to fight soldiers. He has no reference point for fighting industrial extermination. On April 12th, the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, joins Generals Omar Bradley and Patton to inspect the camp personally. They arrive in a convoy of jeeps, the stars on their helmets gleaming in the sun. They are the conquerors of Europe, the men who dismantled the Wehrmacht. But as they step out of their vehicles and into the stench of the camp, their military bearing begins to crack. Eisenhower, usually the stoic diplomat, turns a shade of pale that his aides have never seen. He walks through the camp in silence, his jaw set in a rigid line of fury. He refuses to just look. He investigates. He demands to be shown the torture cells. He interrogates the guides. He stares at the piles of bodies, forcing himself to memorize the details. He tells his staff, "I want to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things if ever, in the future, there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." But it is Patton's reaction that reveals the true depth of the horror. This is all blood and guts. The general who famously slapped a shell-shocked soldier for cowardice. He is not a man of delicate sensibilities. Yet, as the tour progresses to the special barracks where medical experiments were conducted, Patton falters. The camp survivors show the generals the shrunken heads, preserved human trophies kept by the SS commandant's wife, Ilse Koch. They show them pieces of tattooed human skin used as lampshades. Patton, the hardest man in the American army, turns away. His face goes green. He walks behind a barracks shed and vomits. The sights and smells have physically overcome him. He refuses to enter the crematorium, telling the others he cannot handle it. The warrior is undone not by fear, but by disgust. Bradley is equally shaken. He later writes that the smell of death was so overpowering that he could taste it for weeks. These men have sent thousands of soldiers to die in battle, but that was strategy. This is pathology. The shock quickly turns to a cold, razor-sharp anger. As they leave the camp, the generals drive back down the Ettersberg hill. They pass through the pristine tree-lined streets of Weimar. They see the well-dressed civilians walking their dogs. They see the smoke rising from the chimneys of comfortable homes. The contrast snaps something inside the American command. The disconnect is too violent to be ignored. How can these people live here? How can they tend their gardens while 5 miles away human beings are being flayed? The excuse offered by the town officials is immediate and uniform. Wir haben es nicht gewusst. We did not know. Patton hears this. Eisenhower hears this. And they decide, right there on the spot, that this excuse is unacceptable. If the citizens of Weimar did not know, they are going to learn. If they looked away, they are going to be forced to stare. The inspection is over. The lesson is about to begin. April 15th, 1945. The order comes down from the headquarters of the Executive Corps, authorized by General Walton Walker under the direct instruction of Patton. It is a military directive unlike any issued in the war thus far. It does not concern artillery coordinates or supply routes. It concerns the population of Weimar. The order is specific. 1,000 citizens. They are not to be random refugees or laborers. The Americans demand the elite. The list includes the mayor of Weimar, city council members, police officers, wealthy shopkeepers, and the wives of the prominent intelligentsia. These are the people who benefited most from the Nazi regime's stability. The people who attended the opera while the chimney smoked in the distance. On the morning of April 16th, the atmosphere in Weimar shifts from relief to dread. American military police fan out across the city. Their behavior has changed. The GIs who were handing out chocolate yesterday are now stone-faced, gripping their M1 Garans with white-knuckled intensity. They set up cordons. They knock on doors with the heavy thud of authority. Comet, they say, come. Panic ripples through the cobblestone streets. The rumors fly instantly. The Americans are going to shoot us. They are taking us to Siberia. It is a reprisal action. The chosen citizens gather in the city square. They are dressed in their Sunday best, wool coats, felt hats, polished shoes. They look like they are attending a town hall meeting, not a military detention. There is a nervous energy. Some of the women are weeping quietly. The men are indignant, demanding to know under what authority they are being detained. The MPs do not answer. They simply point toward the trucks and the road leading out of the city. The column forms. It is a surreal parade. The cultural elite of Weimar, flanked by jeeps mounted with 50 caliber machine guns, begins to move. They are not marching to a firing squad, though they don't know that yet. They are marching toward the Ettersberg. The route they take is the same one used by the SS trucks for years. It winds up through the thick beech forests, the incline steeping with every mile. At first, there is chatter among the Germans. They complain about the indignity, the mud, the walking. They reassure each other that this is just an intimidation tactic. But as they ascend, the forest changes. The air grows cooler, and then the wind shifts. It starts as a faint trace, an acrid metallic tang that sticks to the back of the throat. The chatter in the column dies out. Handkerchiefs are pulled from pockets and pressed against noses. The Americans marching alongside them do not cover their faces. They want the civilians to breathe it in. They reach the blood road, the final approach paved by prisoners who died, laying the stones. The trees break, and the gates of Buchenwald loom ahead. The sign in the ironwork, Jedem Dasan, casts a long shadow. The civilians stop. They hesitate. But the MPs step forward, gesturing with their rifle barrels. There is no turning back. The gates swing open. The column of 1,000 civilians shuffles into the camp compound. The moment they cross the threshold, the reality of the labor camp is obliterated by the reality of the charnel house. The Americans have prepared a route that leaves nothing to the imagination. They do not guide the citizens toward the administrative offices or the kitchens. They guide them directly into the yard of the crematorium. Here, the Americans have arranged a grotesque display on a large wooden table, similar to a museum exhibit. It is a deliberate curation of horror. On the table sit the artifacts of the SS commandant's tenure. The lampshades made of human skin, the shrunken heads of executed prisoners, and pieces of tanned skin with elaborate tattoos, harvested like leather. The Weimar citizens approach the table. The initial silence breaks. A woman in a fur coat gasps and covers her mouth. A well-dressed elderly man stares, his face draining of color, his knees buckling. He is caught by a neighbor before he hits the dirt. The MPs standing guard do not offer comfort. They stand with arms crossed, their expressions unreadable behind their helmet straps. Look, their posture says. Do not look away. But the table is just the prologue. The tour moves deeper. They are marched past the open trailers. These are not empty. They are piled high with the emaciated, naked bodies of men who died of starvation in the days before the liberation. The limbs are tangled, the ribs protruding like bird cages. The smell here is concentrated, a physical force that induces immediate nausea. The reaction among the Germans is a chaotic mix of physical illness and psychological collapse. Women begin to sob openly, pressing handkerchiefs to their faces, trying to block out the sight. Men turn away, retching into the dust. But whenever someone tries to bypass a pile or shield their eyes, an American MP steps in. "No," the soldier barks, gesturing back to the corpses. "You must see." The most devastating moment, however, is not the dead. It is the living. The survivors of Buchenwald, those strong enough to stand, line the other side of the barbed wire or lean against the barracks. They watch the procession of their former neighbors. The contrast is jarring. The Germans in their wool coats and fedoras, well-fed, round-faced, healthy. The prisoners in their striped rags, eyes sunken, skin like translucent paper. There is no shouting. The prisoners do not scream at the civilians. They simply stare. It is a gaze of profound, damning accusation. The citizens of Weimar have to walk the gauntlet of these eyes. They have to look at the men whose labor built their local factories, whose disappearance they had ignored for 8 years. One German woman, overwhelmed by the sight of a stack of bodies near the crematorium ovens, faints dead away. She is left on the ground for a moment before her companions drag her up. An American soldier remarks dryly to a reporter nearby, "They are finding out that the master race has a weak stomach." The tour lasts for hours. By the time the citizens circle back toward the gates, the denial is gone. The phrase, "we didn't know," has died in their throats. They are weeping, trembling, broken. They have been forced to consume the truth of their regime, physically and mentally. As they stumble out of the gate, back toward the fresh air of the forest, they are not the same people who marched up the hill. The illusion of civilized ignorance has been shattered. The Americans have successfully transferred the burden of the memory. The GIs no longer carry the horror alone. Now the people of Weimar carry it too. As the last of the Weimar citizens stagger out of the main gate, the sun is beginning to dip lower over the Thuringen hills. The walk back down to the city is a chaotic procession of trauma. The stoicism of the German middle class has completely evaporated. Correspondents from major Allied newspapers, including Marguerite Higgins of the New York Herald Tribune, are there to document the exit. They record a spectrum of reactions that reveals the fracturing of the German psyche. Some of the citizens are catatonic, staring straight ahead, their minds unable to process the industrial scale of the slaughter. Others are hysterical, weeping into their hands, muttering prayers or apologies to no one in particular. But there is also a third group, the ones who look angry. Not at the SS, but at the Americans for showing them. Even in the face of irrefutable evidence, a sliver of the population clings to their defense mechanisms. They whisper that the bodies were planted, or that the Americans are exaggerating. It is a desperate final attempt to save their own moral universe from collapsing. The American soldiers, however, are in no mood for nuance. For the GIs of the 80th Infantry and the 4th Armored, the day has clarified the purpose of the war. The abstract fight against fascism has become a concrete fight against this. One MP, watching a well-dressed German woman wipe her eyes with a silk handkerchief, is overheard saying, I don't care if they cry. I want them to smell it. I want them to taste it. Inside the camp, the survivors watch the civilians leave. There is no riot. The prisoners are too weak for violence. But there is a palpable shift in the atmosphere. For years they were invisible. Non-people effectively erased from the world. Today, they were seen. The forced tour has validated their existence. The act of witnessing has turned them from refuse back into human beings. Crucially, the entire event is being recorded. Under Eisenhower's strict orders, U.S. Army Signal Corps photographers are filming every second. They capture the piles of bodies, the ovens, and the faces of the German civilians looking at them. This footage is not intended for newsreels back home. It is intended as legal evidence. The footage shot on this day, and in the days following, will become the core of the documentary film Nazi Concentration Camps, which will later be screened in the courtroom at Nuremberg. The reactions of the Weimar citizens, the fainting, the covering of eyes, will serve as proof that the horror was visible, tangible, and undeniable. That evening back in Weimar, the mood is funereal. The cafes are empty. The denial that sustained the city for the last decade has been punctured. The smell of the camp, which they had successfully ignored for years, now seems to cling to their clothes, their hair, and their curtains. The physical distance between the city and the hill remains 5 miles, but the psychological barrier has been permanently destroyed. They can no longer say they do not know. Now they have to live with the fact that they did. Patton's order at Weimar is not an isolated incident of anger. It becomes the template for the entire Allied occupation. The shock wave that started on the Ettersberg spreads rapidly across the crumbling Reich. As American and British forces uncover camp after camp, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, the Weimar precedent is enforced with rigorous precision. Commanders across the European theatre realize that the German population's psychological firewall must be dismantled systematically. In the town of Nuremberg, after SS guards massacre prisoners during a death march, the local American commander orders the town's leading citizens to carry the decomposing bodies to a proper burial site on a hill overlooking the town. He makes them do it with their bare hands. This evolves into the official policy of denazification. It is no longer enough to remove swastikas from government buildings. The Allies begin a campaign of forced confrontation. Posters are plastered across German cities displaying the photographs taken at Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen with the caption, "Who is guilty?" You. Newsreels compiled by the Signal Corps titled Die Todesmühlen, the death mills, are mandatory viewing for German civilians collecting ration cards. If you want to eat, you must watch. The impact ripples all the way back to the United States. When the footage from Buchenwald hits American movie theaters placed before the feature films, the reaction is seismic. For years, reports of Nazi atrocities had been treated with skepticism by a public that remembered the exaggerated propaganda of World War I. Now the grainy, black and white images of bulldozers pushing bodies into mass graves silence the doubters. The Holocaust moves from the realm of rumor to the realm of historical fact. For the soldiers on the ground, the experience changes the nature of the occupation. The fraternization bans are enforced with new bitterness. The GI who might have smiled at a German Fräulein in March now looks at the population with cold suspicion. They no longer see themselves merely as liberators of territory, but as the wardens of a crime scene. This shift in perspective lays the groundwork for the Nuremberg trials later that year. When the International Military Tribunal convenes, the prosecution does not rely solely on witness testimony, which can be discredited. They rely on the documentation ordered by Eisenhower and Patton. When the courtroom lights dim and the footage of Buchenwald plays, the Nazi defendants, Göring, Hess, Keitel, shift uncomfortably in the dock. The Weimar defense of ignorance crumbles under the weight of the visual evidence. The march up the Ettersberg hill was a small tactical movement in a massive war, involving only a few thousand people. But strategically, it was the moment the Allies decided that the Third Reich would not just be defeated militarily, it would be morally dissected. Patton ensured that the good German who claimed ignorance would forever be haunted by the image of what was happening just 5 miles up the road. Today, the Ettersberg Hill is quiet. The wooden barracks of Buchenwald were torn down long ago, leaving only outlines of crushed stone in the grass to mark where thousands of men once suffered. The crematorium still stands, a brick monument to industrial cruelty, and the wind still sweeps down through the beech forest toward the city of Weimar below. The forced march ordered by General Patton remains one of the most singular moments of the Second World War. It was not a battle won with tanks or artillery, but a confrontation won with truth. Patton and Eisenhower understood something profound in that moment, that the greatest ally of evil is not malice, but silence. The horror of the Holocaust was possible not just because of the fanatics who gave the orders, but because of the ordinary people who agreed not to see, not to ask, and not to know. By forcing the citizens of Weimar to walk that 5-mile road, the American command stripped away the comfort of ignorance. They shattered the dangerous illusion that a society can separate its high culture from its moral responsibilities. They proved that civilization is fragile, and that the distance between the opera house and the concentration camp is measured only in the willingness of good people to look the other way. General Eisenhower's prediction that one day people would try to deny these things ever happened has proven prophetic. But because of the footage taken that day, and because of the witnesses who were forced to stand before the ovens, the record remains indelible. The story of Buchenwald is a warning that echoes far beyond 1945. It reminds us that history is not just what is written in books. It is what is seen, what is acknowledged, and what is remembered. The citizens of Weimar were forced to open their eyes. The question the site asks of us today is simple. When we see injustice now, do we have the courage to look, or do we turn?